Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity. I was here a couple of years ago to present best practices for sharing, and this year the organizers gave me the opportunity to go into more detail regarding the licensing part of things. So I'm going to talk about the CERN Open Hardware License, which is a license we drafted with the aim of providing good options, with licensing options for people who wanted to share hardware, and in particular, it applies very well to HCL designs. So that you can make more sense of the details of the Open Hardware License, I will speak about some fundamentals. So, first of all, a license, as we are going to see, is a permission to do some things that you would otherwise not have the right to do. So what are those things that you, in principle, don't have the right to do? There are three main tools in intellectual property. One is copyright. Copyright deals with the right to make copies, to modify things, and to redistribute them. So when you make a copy of something and you distribute it, in principle, you wouldn't have the right, and that's because of copyright. Trademarks. If you take a logo and you trademark it and you put it on your product, then somebody else cannot put it on their product and sell that product. So that's what trademark controls. And patents protect an idea. Copyright protects the expression of that idea. Patents protect the idea. So, as I said, a license, etymologically the word means permission. So a license is a permission that you grant to somebody, and of course, it has to be a permission to do something that they would otherwise not have the right to do. Otherwise, if they had the right to do it, then they did not no license. Okay. So when we started thinking about hardware licenses, software licenses were our starting point. Also at the time, when people started writing HCL and sharing it with others, software licensing was all there was. So people started using software licenses in different types of licenses. Some applied easier than others, as we will see later. So it was a natural starting point for us. Most of the software licenses, they are copyright licenses in the sense that they allow to copy, modify, redistribute, and they benefit from the very uniform legal landscape worldwide. And this is a result from a uniformation operation in the 80s with a lot of push by some people like the film industry. They wanted that, copyright law is very uniform in all the countries. So that makes it relatively easy to write a license that relies on copyright because it can apply very uniformly across the world. And this uniform behavior is that, in principle, all rights are reserved. If I write a poem and you take it, I put it on the web, you take it, you modify, you republish, in principle, you don't have the right to do that, okay? Because by default, unless you give an explicit license, an explicit permission, all rights are reserved. Modern software licenses also cover patents, because patents became a thing a few years ago in software as well. In hardware, they have always been important. But modern software licenses not only say you have the right to copy, to modify, and redistribute, but they also say, by the way, I'm promising you that if you use what I'm giving you, I will not sue you for patent infringement. It sounds a bit preposterous, it sounds crazy, but it can happen. So modern licenses also give this reassurance to the licensee. So when you give a permission, you're the licensor, and the person who receives the permission is the licensee. So the licensee also receives a patent license, and also typically, there will be a reciprocal of that patent clause in the sense that if the licensee sues the licensor for patent infringement, then the licensee will lose all or part of the rights given by the licensor. Okay, so when you give permissions, you might attach conditions on those permissions. Okay, I give you permission to copy, modify, redistribute, provided you do this and that and that. So depending on those conditions that you impose, there are three licensing regimes. Imagine I write an FFT library and you want to use it in your project. If I just say, yeah, you can copy, modify, redistribute, and the only thing you need to do is to acknowledge me as the original author, that's a permissive regime. I'm not imposing too much on you. Big exponents in the software world of permissive licenses are BSD, MIT, and Apache v2. Apache v2 is the one we recommend at CERN for permissive projects because it has a patent license. BSD and MIT were drafted before patents became a thing in software. Then, if I want to ask of you, I say I give you these permissions, but if you modify the FFT library, you must make those modifications available under the same license, therefore feeding this virtuous circle of sharing. But if you embed it in a larger project, you don't need to release the larger project. That's what we call weakly reciprocal regime, and the biggest exponent of that type of license in software is LGPL. And if I say you can use my FFT, but if you embed it in a larger project, you must release also the larger project, that's the strongly reciprocal regime, and the biggest exponent in the software world for that type of license is GPL. Now, from a complexity perspective, when you try to transpose these concepts into hardware, the tricky ones are the reciprocal ones. The permissive is relatively straightforward. So what are the issues with the two reciprocal types when you apply them to HCL? First of all, when you apply these software licenses, first of all, the language. They use terms which are difficult to relate to for an HCL designer, which bring lack of clarity, which is never good for legal purposes, because it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Then for the particular case of weakly reciprocal licenses, there is no real equivalent to linking. There is a clause 4D in LGPL that says, if you release a project made of a proprietary part and a free part, free as in freedom, you must allow the users to upgrade the free part with a new version, and this is achieved in practice in software by releasing a binary of the proprietary part and then linking a new version of the free part. Okay, but this is very awkward to do for HCL designs, so yeah, impossible to comply in practice. Reciprocity, what does that mean? What should that mean in a hardware context? In principle, I would hope that if I receive an object, a physical object, the license should guarantee that I get access to the sources that allowed to manufacture or to configure that object. Also, what is the scope in terms of going low and going high? For example, if I have a design for a computer mouse and I link physically to a computer, does that mean that I need to release the design files for the computer as well? Or also, if I'm designing a PCB and I include resistors, should I disclose the recipe for making resistors? So all these things are not clear in reciprocal software licenses. Then, specificity in HCL very often, especially for FPGAs, well, also for ASICs, it's, the ecosystem is dominated by proprietary tools, and part of which actually go into the design itself. It's very frequent that some primitives go into the design itself. Again, problem with GPL. So, the CERN Open Hardware License is our attempt to cope with those issues. It is based on rights. So remember, you always have to have something which is not legal to do, and then you provide the license. So, for example, in the case of HCL files, it would be the copying, modifying, and redistributing is not allowed by copyright law. And then the license specifies conditions for copying, modifying, and distributing, which is typical. And then also, because it's a hardware license, to make hardware based on those designs and to distribute that hardware. It was drafted by two very competent lawyers and myself. And it comes in 3 variants because we want it to be a one-stop shop for any licensing needs. So we don't prejudge about the mindset. You could be in a permissive mindset, weakly reciprocal, strongly reciprocal. It's a bit like the Creative Commons families of licenses. You can pick, there's a menu. Here's a graphical depiction of what I said. So imagine you have a piece of HCL code released under one of the 3 licenses, and this is your project. You embed this core in your project, and depending on what was the original license for this code, if it's permissive, you don't need to release anything. If it's weakly reciprocal, you just release the modifications you did to this code. And if it's strongly reciprocal, you release the whole design. Okay, so how does CERN OHL cope with the shortcomings I explained earlier? In terms of language, it's very easy. It was drafted from scratch, so the language is a language that hardware people can relate to easily. Linking, there is no clause equivalent to this LGPL clause. In the weakly reciprocal variant, so the W variant, there is no clause equivalent to the one you have in LGPL, which is the problematic one that says that you should be able to relink a new part of the free part, a new version of the free part with the proprietary part. In terms of reciprocity, we have a clause that says that if you embed a URL in the object, it should be respected so that people who receive the object, independently of how many hands it went through, they always get access to the sources. And then this problem of how high the reciprocal obligations go and how low, we introduced two concepts, product and available component. Product is how high it goes. So the product is what you make out of the sources. So in the example of the mouse, it would be the mouse itself. It doesn't go into the computer because the files that you released are the mouse design files. So product is what you make with those files, and that limits the obligations on the reciprocal, the reciprocity obligations. And going down, we have this notion of available component, which reflects common practice in hardware design. When you design a PCB and you put a resistor there, people know that you can get resistors. So it's an available component, therefore you're not obliged to disclose the recipe for making a resistor. We actually use this notion of available components to get around this problem with proprietary tools for which you must use some of the primitives for your FPGA design. So they qualify as available components. So you don't need to release, which anyway you're not allowed to, you don't need to release the details of the cores that you use if they are shipped with your standard proprietary design tools. Otherwise, the S variant behaves as you would expect. If somebody else adds to the project, they must release those designs, but not for the proprietary cores that you must use in many of the designs. So that's the weakly and strongly reciprocal side of things, but many people are using permissive licenses. In particular, they are very, very popular in the RISC-V ecosystem. So if you are in a permissive mindset or you want to implement this permissive sharing regime in your project, which license should you use? Now, as I said, permissive is much simpler than reciprocal. So you have a choice and many things work. Apache v2, which is a software license, as I said, is very much used and it works. The advantage is that it's well known by lawyers and developers. So if you're in a company, for example, and you want to get the okay from your legal department, they already know that it's a safe license for them to use. So you would have less friction for adoption. If you're uneasy about the software language in Apache and you want the same but for hardware, then SolderPad is a good option because it provides some kind of dictionary. That basically, it says, the license says, take Apache v2 and replace this bit by this bit by this. So in particular in the definitions, so it's an Apache for hardware. And then, of course, there's the permissive variant of the CERN Open Hardware License. It is largely equivalent to Apache v2 and SolderPad in the type of things it expects from licensees, except it has stronger patent language. As I said, the patent clause in these licenses goes two ways. So I'm the licensor. I give you a reassurance that I will not sue you for patent infringement if you use my code. And then if you sue me, you will lose rights that I'm giving you. Now, the rights that you lose when you sue me in Apache v2 are only the patent rights. Same in SolderPad because it's a copy of Apache v2 with some dictionary. In CERN OHLP, you will lose also all the rights in the license, including the copyright. I think it is a substantial difference because very, very often, I, as a licensor, will not be holding any patents. I have the copyright of my code. So I think the CERN OHLP has more teeth, in a sense, than the Apache v2 and SolderPad 2.1. Okay, so other bits and pieces, very often your designs or the things you publish will include software and documentation. We don't think you should use CERN OHL for those. So there are very good options for software. I already listed the ones that we at CERN recommend for the three licensing regimes for software: permissive, weakly reciprocal, and strongly reciprocal. And for documentation, CC BY, and CC by SA are two good choices. If you want to be on the permissive side or on the reciprocal side, the by is just attribution, and by SA's share alike is the reciprocal option for the Creative Commons license that you can use for your documentation. And to finish, for those of you who are at CERN, and also maybe it can be useful for people outside CERN if they want to take this back to their labs and suggest that this could become a service as well. Some instructions or some guidance for those of you who would like to open source your work at CERN. This is the sequence of things that must happen. First of all, you check with your team and the community, does it make sense to open source? Then you check with your section leader or group leader, so line management. Then you go to knowledge transfer, the KT group, to see if they also think it's a good idea to open source. And finally, you go to the OSPO, which is this new thing we created a few years ago. It's a body staffed with volunteers at CERN who will guide you through the open sourcing process using best practices. And then they will eventually, because I'm part of the OSPO, we will eventually suggest an optimal license as well, and then you can go back to your line management for a final decision. So I'm leaving you with some references. The CERN Open Hardware License webpage, the forum in case you have any questions. Then there is a technical website for the OSPO where we have a lot of material on best practices, also a way to get in touch with us. So yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier. Do we have any questions, please? Nicolo?
Hi, thank you for the nice presentation, and thank you for designing this nice license that I actually use. I have actually a few questions. So, first of all, let's imagine, for example, I have some FPGA design, and I include a partial reconfiguration region in that, so that the user of my design can plug whatever algorithm they want in that partial reconfiguration region. Mm-hmm. Would the code that they load in the partial reconfiguration region be affected by my license?
Yes. Okay. Thanks for the question. When do obligations kick in? A binary is covered by copyright. This is, again, part of the efforts of the people who were driving for uniformization of copyright law in the 80s. That means that when you ship a bit stream inside a product, you are distributing and you are doing, so the person who ships a bit stream with your code plus their own contribution is potentially infringing your copyright. So they are subject to whatever you wrote in your license. So depending on whether you chose permissive, weakly reciprocal, or strongly reciprocal, it might go as far as an obligation for them to release their sources. Okay, I don't know if it's clear. Basically, there are two things that you cannot do because of copyright law. You cannot publish the sources, republish somebody else's sources, and you cannot ship a binary. Okay? In this particular case you're describing, the most likely thing that they would do is send binaries around either through the internet or embedded in a physical object. And both of those things would result in an obligation for them to comply with the license you chose. And depending on which license you chose, they might have to release the sources.
Okay, and follow-up question. If I have chosen, for example, a strongly reciprocal license, and now I changed my mind and I want to go to a more permissive one, so either a weakly or a fully permissive license.
Yes. Okay.
Can I do that in a new version of my code?
Yes. Okay. These are super good questions. And it allows me to speak about something which is not very often considered. The only person who is not bound by the license is the licensor, obviously, because I'm giving you permissions for my code, and I'm imposing some conditions on you, because in principle you wouldn't have the right to do the copying, redistributing, and so on. I can do that, but I don't need those permissions. I can, I wrote this, so I don't need. So I can change the license because in the case of the S variant, the strongly reciprocal variant, a licensee cannot change the license, but the licensor can always change the license. Now, what I already published is done. So if I have a Git repo and I have a release which was released under the S variant, people can still fork from there and continue the S path, because those are permissions I gave, and there's no way back. But I can make new releases with a new variant of the license and take it from there. And the only person that can do that is the licensor or licensors. This is also why some people are a bit careful when they accept new contributions in a project, because to change license is something that only licensors can do. If your licensors are a set of 1 million people that you don't even know, it's going to be very hard to convince everybody to change the license. And this is also why some people implement these CLAs, which are not very popular in open source circles, where you grant one single person or one single entity the permission to change license in the future and things like that. But yes, the short answer to your question is, as a licensor, you can change a license.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple more questions, but I think I'll leave some space.
Yes.
Anybody else? Please.
Yeah, I have a quick one. So did I understand correctly, if I don't include any license in my public repository, it's by default no one can copy it?
Yes.
And I can pursue them if they do?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's non-intuitive, but it's the way it is. You publish it, so people interpret that you're intending to share. But if you don't put a license header, then it's an invitation for trouble.
Okay, so
yes.
No license is the least permissive license?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Please, in the back, yes. Thank you.
Hi. So in the software space, we see lots of, say, non-commercial licenses, non-military licenses, this kind of thing. Has there been any exploration of that at CERN?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Traditionally...
Or what's your take? Yeah.
Yes, okay, I see. CERN Open Hardware License is the only hardware license which is approved by OSI, the Open Source Initiative. And many institutions specify that they will take code and they will be happy with their employees publishing code if the license is approved by OSI. This is a matter of subjective risk assessment or evaluation. These are the people in OSI, they are very tough when it comes to approving a license, so you know you're on safe ground and that it's open source. They also keep the open source definition, and what they do when you submit a license to OSI is they check if the license complies. Point number 6 in the open source definition is non-discrimination against fields of endeavor, which means that military is one field of endeavor, commercial activity is one field of endeavor. So any limitation on commercial activity or a specific use for military, for example, would automatically make the license non-open source. So I don't have any particular take, when people try to do these ethical licenses, for example, that's fine by me. But when we drafted this CERN Open Hardware license, we wanted to have wide impact, which means being OSI approved is an important bit. Also, these rules of open source, they are the result of many years of practice and failures and learnings and so on. It's slippery terrain. You have the best intentions when you put some kind of limitation, but then it turns against you. Sure. Yes, to answer your question, I have no particular opinion as an individual, but the aim we had when drafting the CERN Open Hardware license was to make it an open source license approved by OSI, so it would be more adopted.
Okay, if I could just follow up a little bit. So, okay, the military aspect, I think people have feelings about it. Like, I think good luck suing the military in any country. I don't think you'll have much success. And if it's in a different country, well, and they go to war, well, they're going to do what they're going to do. So your license matters very little. But the commercial aspect, I think people really care about, because in the open source realm, like in software, we do have a lot of cases where you have a small team, they've done work that is very pervasive, like OpenSSL and so on, and they're not supported enough. And
yes. This is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Of course, I go to FOSDEM and I see many people who are doing great work and are struggling to to reach the end of the month. So this is a very common problem in open source circles. The standard answer to that is an open source license is not a business model. So you need a business model for your life. It's your economic life. It is true that you cannot monetize something which is standard economics 101. You can only monetize what is scarce. I guess there are people here, I know there are some people here who have a business model based on open source, but where they are monetizing is something which is scarce. The most typical example is brain cycles, because my brain is as proprietary as it gets. If you want to access it, there's only 24 hours in a day, so it's a scarce good. And I can ask you for money in exchange of my time. This is a scarce good. So even the most open source companies, when you scratch, you will see that what they're selling is something which is scarce. It's never the access to the code. Okay? So that's as far as I will go regarding business. I'm not a business person, sure, but it's clear to me that this license is one piece in your strategy in a wider business model. It's not the business model in itself.
It's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Davide?
So I have a question from remote, actually. So they're asking what is the policy for code generated by AI in this case?
Ooh, okay. We have it in our to-do list at the OSPO to look into this. Policy for code generated by AI. I must admit I'm not ready to answer this question yet. I know that there are good guidelines from people who have already looked at this. I am not even sure I can quote them safely, but I think the Linux Foundation has looked into this and other people in the software world. And I think what makes sense is to piggyback on these efforts because many people have thought about this already. So from, I think the, I don't know if I should get into detail, but there's always a human in the loop, right? So in principle, I did something, maybe with the help of AI or not, but then most of the projects, best practices, the projects that have already thought of this are saying, I don't care what you used, but for me, you are the one contributing here. That means that I'm going to assume that the code is yours, that you have the right to submit it, and then from now on, if I have a question during this pull request, you are the one answering, not the AI. And for me, it's coming from you, right? And from then on, it's like any standard contribution. But again, take this with a pinch of salt because there might be nuances that I'm not treating here. What I can tell you is that it is a subject, of course, and we have it in our to-do list in the OSPO to provide some guidance for the CERN people. And of course, it's a public website, so whoever wants to read it and take inspiration from it is welcome.
I think that's
so,
also
that will be the last question, I'm afraid. There is very much
I'll stay here for the whole morning, so feel free to get in touch over coffee.
Or, yes, exactly. If you'll be around for the coffee break, please don't hesitate to contact Javier. Let's thank him again.
Thank you.